Welcome to the Content Podcast, conversations with Silicon Valley's creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates.
Hello?
Today we talk with Sinjin Jones. He's a transmedia artist and the executive artistic director for the Pear Theatre in Mountain View. Hey Sinjin, this is Daniel. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. It's always nice to have fun stuff to do like this.
Yeah. So, well, you've been having a fun year, right? Because you're the artistic director at the Pear Theatre, and you started just in January last year. Is that correct?
Yeah, just in time for all the stuff to sort of go down.
Did you bring it? Is that
Maybe. I mean, I could have been the bringer of doom.
Yeah. So now you're originally from Colorado, correct?
That is true. Yeah.
And it looks like, as I was kind of trolling the World Wide Web and all that kind of stuff, is this the first time that you've kind of had a project or kind of, I'm assuming that you moved here. Because you moved before, you got the position before COVID, so you would move, I would think.
Yeah, I moved back last summer, so I got here around August of last year, of 2019,
Okay.
And then got the job and started January 2020. So I was doing some other stuff around the area, some acting, some immersive work as well before I got the job at the Pear.
Okay, that's great. And that's the first time that you came to California, or kind of moved out of the Colorado area?
Yeah, I started and did my career and sort of made the first part of my career there. I started a couple businesses, was artistic director around the area for a couple of things, and it seemed like a change. I'd visited the Bay Area before, but I had a friend who moved here to start law school, so it seemed like some good timing.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so then in Colorado, you were a part of Otherworld Collective, right? Can you kind of tell me what that project was and what you guys were doing with that and how that kind of started?
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of the things that I did in Colorado really started because you get out of undergrad. I had a writing, directing for theater and film bachelor's degree, and no one wants to hire you to do anything because you're a punk and you're like 21 years old and you don't know what you're doing. And so I was getting some gigs doing some teaching work, and that sort of and I really enjoyed doing that. But, I wanted to direct and I wanted to create things. And
Yeah.
so actually started Otherworld Collective with a group of friends of mine. We were like, it would be great to get a media artist collective going and to try to experiment in. The reason why I went to CU Denver is because they had a combined theater and film program at the time.
Okay.
And the connection point between media forms is something that's always been really interesting to me. I love storytelling and storytelling across media forms, either in the intermedia format or in the transmedia format, is just such a fascinating art form. And so it sort of started from a wanting to do that. And it felt like, theaters were nonprofits. So we set off on what is the longest adventure of my life of getting 501c3 approval, which took a very long time. But
right.
And then we did several projects, and I sort of passed it off as I left. And it's just an opportunity for me and some collaborators of mine to do some interesting work in collaboration with. We ended up working with CU Denver for a couple of things, and
cool.
It was just a fun way to experiment across media formats.
Yeah, it seems like that seems to be a theme that I'm finding out or seeing about you, and I'm glad that you mentioned it, because just the idea of multimedia or transmedia and storytelling. How and then hearing actually that you kind of had this kind of like double major between film and theater. What how did that kind of come up with you? When did you realize you kind of had an interest in story and even film and theater?
Yeah, I think when I was a kid, and we grew up really poor in Park Hill, in Colorado, and it's a neighborhood in Denver. There were we had video games and stuff, and was into that, but my brother was more into that. And I, my elementary school for 2 years, my last 2 years became this Smith Elementary School of the Arts, and so I had a little bit more access than a lot of other folks in my area would have
cool.
had. And this is not an area that would traditionally have a ton of arts programming. But also, when I was bored or alone or like felt like the world was crashing into me, there were like only a few things that I could really do. And one of the weird things that I started doing is that we could always go to the dollar store when we went to the grocery store, and my mom would buy us like one thing.
Yeah.
And one day, and she always had a radio that had a tape recorder on it. And I like one day I was
Oh,
like, I'm gonna get some tapes because there were three of them and they're $1. This is like 1996.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so I would go and I would like sit in my closet and I would just turn the recording on and I would just like tell stories to myself and
Oh,
just like
yeah.
see how that went. And I had a really great time. And then in the summers, I would write little stories and then we would act them out for the neighborhood in the middle of all
Nice.
the other crazy stuff we would do. I don't know that I realized that it was like theater or like
Right.
anything meaningful at that point, but I did like, I just, there's something about learning about other people's stories or like seeing people and
Yeah.
getting in depth into a character or that sense of awe that I've always been attached to. And that's like awe is the thing that I'm always sort of,
Yeah.
awe is an interesting thing to me, that connection to something larger than yourself. And I've only ever gotten it from art and from story. And so I
Yeah.
think
Cool.
that's sort of what it was always meant to that's sort of how I progressed, I guess.
Yeah. Do you remember one of the plays or the theaters that you wrote for the neighborhood kids that you
Oh,
kind of like one theme or a story that might have been there? Do you remember
yeah,
one?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I have all of them still because it was like
Awesome.
my first. I would type them up at school and print them out, and then try to save them to like a flash drive, which were like eighty
Yeah.
dollars. And I would like save up for a very long time to try to figure out how to get the space. Um, the one that comes to mind is like this story of these kids who were like, I don't know, for some silly reason, were at school on a Saturday, and or like maybe they'd been called in by their teacher for like detention or
Detention or something. Yeah.
something,
Yeah. Yeah.
and there was like a gigantic tornado that like ripped through the town,
Oh,
and they
yeah.
had to barricade themselves in the school and save each other and save themselves. But then they got transported to another dimension, and they
Yeah.
were like exploring this other dimension in order to get back and to save themselves. I remember that one clear because I remember the neighbors across the street from us. We would go over their house because they had and the parents would come, and we would like charge like 50 cents for people to see
Oh,
the
yeah.
show.
Yeah. Awesome.
Very, very business minded.
Yeah, 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 exactly. That's cool. I mean, as you're telling that story, I totally can think of like, you know, clips of Goonies, Stranger Things. Do you know what I mean? Like all
Yes,
that. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, totally. That's awesome. That's cool. Yeah. So I mean, you seem that you have uh, like yeah, I mean, you have definitely have multi-talented, right? I mean, like even on your website, how you kind of break things down between written and oral and visual and temporal and there's photography and there's watercolor on wood. There's like, and some links to a couple different films. Which one of those mediums do you feel is closest to what you're discovering your voice is?
Mm, that's a great question. I do not know that I have an excellent answer for that question. So there's actually just I wrapped up my MFA in writing this past July. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this past July. And the critical essay I wrote for that was about this argument that I made. And in this, I was a sort of dual genre in script writing and in prose.
Mm.
Um, and the critical essay I wrote was about, it was really about trying to convince artists that actually what the future of writing is, what the future of art is in the concept of storytelling itself
Mm.
and not
Yeah.
in genre or media or medium specific art. And
Mm.
that's especially true for writers, I think, because um, while I don't think novels will die or anything like that, I do think that increasingly, you know writing and creating work across genre is something that is demanded or requested of artists.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm always fascinated, and my fundamental philosophy about art is what is going to serve the story best and
Yeah.
letting the story guide. And so, like, you know, my work at the Pear is very heavily theater focused and very heavily about performance and engaging the audience in that way. Although this much of this last year has been certainly a combined theater and film and
Right.
lots
Yeah.
of other things. My visual art these days, most recently, is about poetry and visual art together. So, like my
Hmm.
Instagram, I post visual art there more often than I update my website for sure. And it's just a lot of poetry and visual art mixed.
Yeah.
Um, my I'm working on a couple of writing projects that are sort of poetry and prose mix, but it's really, to me, how I try to define it is around, okay, this is the story, and like, what is the story trying to tell me in terms of the goals, in terms of the
Yeah.
goals of the story, and try to match the art form or learn the art form that
Hmm.
feels most suitable for that. Because to me,
Yeah.
I am interested in telling the story in the way that is meant to be told. And if I'm not the person to tell that story, that's also fine. But if there's a way, if I'm trying to wrench this story into one form or another because that's the only art form I practice in, then it feels
Yeah.
like it's not doing as much service to the story itself.
Yeah.
And so I just try to, and so in terms of voice, so that's a really hard question for me, because I think, to me, there's meaning and value in using the stories to define
Hmm.
to define the medium. And maybe my voice, I want to define my voice more in the types of stories I like to tell.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. That's cool.
and for
Then
Go
what
ahead.
would you say then? Yeah. What are the types of stories that you want to tell?
I find myself, I think, most interested in one, very character driven small
Hmm.
stories,
Hmm.
stories that maybe have big implications but are very personal, um, often in the drama category more so than comedy. And
Hmm.
then maybe more than that, I often find myself in the, it's more and more so, interested in the world of magical realism, um, with sci-fi thrown in there, I suppose. Like, I'm interested in this, like, interesting liminal space between imagination and reality. I like gritty
Sure.
urban settings, but I
Yeah.
also like the magic that can exist in there,
Yeah.
and how that plays out against, with and for characters who've maybe had, I mean, me having experienced a significant amount of trauma in my life,
Mm.
characters who have dealt with trauma in one way or another,
Yeah.
characters who are from backgrounds that are, less represented in our sort of mainstream, in the way that media is portrayed these days.
Yeah.
Um,
So kind
but
of, it's kind of
yeah,
the kids that went to school on Saturday and then got mixed, found themselves in a different dimension.
yeah, those detention kids who maybe didn't even feel like they did anything wrong, and then have to go about saving the world. But the
Yeah.
story is really about how they, like, their friendship or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you mentioned, definitely the character and trauma, because I did watch After, and a little bit
Mm,
of, it's Sun, Moon, Stars, and just, you know, there's a lot of kind of like sadness, darkness,
yeah.
and that's going on, it seems. And so, I mean, there's some cutting and stuff going on. And um, is that part of your own experience, Brie, or that was with a group of writers, or especially like After? Um, why did you choose a particular subject matter for that story? That I believe, I mean, it seems she must have been. I guess I don't know if she was a prostitute, or
Yeah.
well, she did get kind of raped, and then
Yeah.
yeah. So what was the kind of the message in the story that you were communicating with those films?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with the case of After is an interesting case, because I was really interested in the sort of filmmaking structures of Dogma 95, but sort of adapting them to what I thought I was interested in, which is, I want to capture what's in the frame, and I don't
Mm,
want the camera to be a I want the camera to become a character, in that it's just, like, horrifyingly objective.
mm,
Um,
mm,
I'd written a poem called Evangeline,
mm,
when I was before that film, and it explored this character of a prostitute in the later stages of her existence, and I became really fascinated with sex work and with sex workers,
mm,
and with the the power that you have to envelop that work. And
Yeah.
that piece itself, I wrote, there are very few lines in that piece. I wrote an outline for that piece, and I actually, got together with Leah, the performer who played the role in that, and we actually just created the structure of that together
Yeah.
and worked toward making something that felt authentic in our research. And my mom spent 10 years homeless and on the streets and in halfway houses and doing whatever she needed to do to survive.
Yeah.
And so there's a little there's a part of, and my childhood was not easy, and
Mm.
there's a part of that world about those folks who don't really you don't get to know about them as much as you would like to,
Yeah.
in terms of these people being real full three-dimensional characters. And a lot of that piece was about exploring what it's like to feel like you're alone,
Yeah.
and what takes you out of that place, where, because the character is contemplating suicide, but
Yeah.
gets a call from her dad
Yeah. Yeah.
and chooses not to. And there are many things that surprised me about that process, like that shower sequence. The
Yeah.
anticipation for me was that that door was going to get closed.
Yeah.
And the actor had complete freedom to do whatever it is she wanted. And my um we only I my rule for that set, and actually for many of my film sets, is actually we're not doing more than 2 or 3 takes.
Oh,
And
yeah.
for that set was when I was first starting to experiment with that. And so I was like, we're only doing one take of
Hmm.
any of these things.
Yeah.
And if it's not there, then we cut it, because that's not meant to be in the story.
Wow. Wow.
And so a lot of that was about a real big deep dive into character that took maybe 3 or 4 days, and then an afternoon of shooting, and then just seeing what we got,
Yeah.
in that contemplative state. Some Sun, Moon, Stars, Rain. Actually, that's a series of 3 vignettes about love stories, where you sort of see the middle of these love stories as opposed
Right.
to the beginnings or the ends. And the first large scene in that, the one that takes place in the hotel room, also has a prostitute. And in my mind, it's the same person
Hmm. Okay.
from After and from the poem Evangeline that I wrote. And it's exploring
Okay.
a different part of her existence. And Iona, who was the performer in that piece, similar structure in exploring that character. And we
Yeah.
shot that shot. It's 42 minutes, and there's one cut in there.
Oh, wow.
But for the actors, there were no cuts for them for that entire length of time.
Oh, wow.
And the
Yeah.
camera and we shot it 3 takes in the evening in a hotel room.
Yeah. So it gives it much more that real documentary kind of feel rather than, scene cut, scene cut, scene cut. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and just wanted it to feel like, the camera is here and very voyeuristic,
Yeah.
and wanting the actors to do. And I don't rehearse the scenes when I'm in film, especially. I do not rehearse the scenes before we get to set. We might read the scene and talk
Mm-hmm.
through the logistics, but we generally do exercises, and we get to know our characters, and
Yeah.
we dig deep into those, to inhabiting the characters and the world.
Yeah.
But I like the idea in film of it feeling like really fresh, and to the extent that I don't really care about the lines as much. It's about the feeling. And if the lines are conveying the feeling best, then we should stick to the lines. But if they
Yeah.
discover something in the moment, then they should change that. Obviously, that's very different in theater and other practices. But
Yeah.
um,
Especially when you have the rights to do someone else's play
oh
for
yeah,
theater.
and scripts for film, screenplays are a whole different beast than plays. They're
Yeah.
just, the art form is very different, and the intention, I think, in writing them are very different.
Yeah.
Um, but
It's
I
interesting. Yeah.
think, yeah, that subject matter is really interesting to me, of like seeing people in private moments that seem like we're not supposed to be there,
Yeah.
but are really intimate, and we
Yeah.
gain something by learning about these characters.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, you know what I mean? It's so easy to classify, stereotype somebody, right? And
Hmm.
when you don't see their life, how did they get into that situation? What caused them? And yeah, like you're saying, the strength it takes to continue to go on, right? I
Yeah.
mean, some of it is a little bit of I guess denial or, blocking. But that takes a lot of strength to continue to go forward, in tough odds. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, and like learning, hearing stories from my mom about her time when she was younger, and knowing what it's like to grow up in poverty, and like,
Yeah.
it's like there's an amount of bravery and strength that exists
Yeah.
inherently,
Yeah.
and also like, when it comes to sex, where like in Sun Moon Stars Rain, they she's one of the most powerful characters in the piece,
Mm.
because she comes in, this guy, the story of the scene is this guy comes in, and he is a John, but he thinks that he might be the father of her daughter. He's been sort of stalking her, and it's very creepy.
Yeah.
um, and he's like, I'll get you out of this work, I'll take care of you. And she's like, I don't want that. Like,
Yeah.
this is not anything about
Oh.
this is what you want, this is your perspective, and this is not what I want. um, and she sort of has such a strong amount of power in her position, in a line of work that I think historically we do not value as a society, and we do not see it as a strength or a powerful. And in many cases, I don't want to say that it is. Like,
Right.
in
Yeah.
many cases it isn't. But one can find strength and power and move forward and make life in so many different situations. And I'm
Yeah.
interested in the world where those things happen. And when you have trauma in your past, the ways in which you are interested in finding strength and power in your life, to me,
Yeah.
are very interesting.
Yeah. And to find that hope. I mean, even like
Hmm.
with after, the telephone call and it's her dad, right? It gives you that sense of like, oh, right?
Yeah.
That connection of, yeah, I know what it's like to be struggling, contemplating, checking out, and then having something that goes, no, I can hold on. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
there's so much beauty in those small moments. And like, I think we underestimate as a society how important those little moments are that you can't predict. But
yeah.
like, that have, I mean, there are times for me when I'm like at the bottom, and like just
Yeah.
one comment from one person or one random event lifts you up in a way that you don't expect.
Yeah. That's the thing that has kind of kept me going. I think of like, like movements of big changes in my life, and back when people would make phone calls, the change is a phone call away. I mean, it's like, it's amazing, like how, so, you can have a friend of a friend who calls like, hey, I heard about you and we want to offer you this, and it's like, whoa, what?
Yeah.
That it could be, you don't know what the next day can
Yeah.
bring, which is
Yeah.
hard after, when you have 30, 40, 50, 60, 300 days of the same thing. It's hard to think that, wait, but maybe today's the day of change, right?
Yeah. And not knowing and not being able to predict, and trying to hold out, and not understanding or realizing even the mental headspace that you're in. And,
Yeah.
in this pandemic, it's like,
Yeah.
it's I mean, there's a reason why, the levels of suicide have gone up and all of
Yeah.
those things. And, it puts into perspective the value of making sure that you're checking in with people who you care about, and
Yeah.
just saying hello, because those moments might mean everything
Yeah.
to someone who you don't expect. You might not even be interested in talking to them,
Yeah.
and but those moments of connection are really, I value the moments of connection that I have with people outside of the people that I live with so
Yeah.
intensely now, and in a way that I didn't before. And I know performers that we've worked with via
Mm.
Zoom or via filming one day at the Pear,
Yeah.
where they live alone, and like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
silence can be deafening.
Yeah. Yeah. So, thinking even about those, in some ways, for you to, I mean, I want to find out kind of how you got to the Pear Theater, but as I kind of look at it, is like, theaters that are live performances with actors and tech crews and audiences. And then for that to have to transition and start to do, like to film them, you're kind of like the right guy. You're kind of like in the right place at the right time. But in January 2020, nobody knew 2 months later that this was going down. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, like,
Yeah, I mean, look, I did not think I would be using that part of my skill set in this intensive a way
Yeah.
when I took the position at the pair. Um, it is very lucky, I think
Yeah.
the Pear's board was looking for a candidate, I think, that, brought a variety of things in terms of background. And
Hmm.
um, I don't know that they were thinking about
Right.
what if there's a global pandemic and we can't do these
Yeah.
things
Right.
live on
Exactly.
stage. But I do feel lucky that, I have the skill set to experiment and to explore, and I have the interest in experimenting and exploring
Yeah.
that allows me to find joy and to get meaning from continuing to do work during these times. And
Yeah.
just lucky that I have a job.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. So how did you get to the Pear Theater? How did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was a super interesting story about it. I was doing some shows. I was a teacher in Colorado, and it just felt like that part of my life was coming to an end.
Hmm.
And was doing a couple of shows, and then we're going to move out here. Um, I had applied originally to the pair before we moved out here, so this was
Okay.
in July, August when they first opened up, and didn't hear from them until after I got out here. I did an immersive show at the Winchester House.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and they did a Halloween thing
Hmm.
that I worked with them on, and then worked with Epic Theater to
Yeah.
do an immersive show in San Francisco. And
Yeah.
when I was rehearsing for one and doing the other ones, not really knowing what I was going to do when those things end, because I made a decision that, like, a very conscious decision, because I've made very conscious decisions like this before about whether or not to do artistry full time or to
Oh, yeah.
add teaching onto it, and made the decision that if I was moving out here, that is what I was going to do full time. And so I was very
Yeah.
prepared to be working gig to gig
Yeah.
and contract to contract. And they got back to me in October and was like, "Hey, you want to come in for an interview?" I didn't know anyone at the theater, and
Yeah.
um, I think it's very fortuitous, or kismet, or whatever you want to call, or intelligence, or whatever, that they even looked at my application and took it seriously. I think because with theaters of the size in a community as tight knit as the South Bay theater community is,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is highly unlikely that they
Yeah.
would hire a candidate outside of their general family of human beings. I think
Yeah.
that is really outside of the realm of what I think most theaters are doing, thinking when they're hiring a new artistic
Sure.
director. And
Yeah.
I think, the first interview went well, and I went to see a couple of the productions, and it felt like a family.
Hmm.
And, it's, I am relatively confident in my skill set in terms of producing theater and directing and those things
Hmm.
for where I am. I mean, there's always like a ton to learn, but I like the practice and I like getting better. But there's an amount of familialness and love that you can't that is really difficult to create in a theater.
Hmm.
And everyone was so, even before they knew that I was interviewing for the role, everyone was remarkably kind and
Yeah. Awesome.
loving. And when I walked in the door, it felt like I was walking into someone's house, and
Yeah.
everyone was so gracious and kind.
Cool.
And I was like, oh, I would love to be a part of this family.
Yeah.
Um, and then I interviewed with the board, and I guess the rest is is what it is. I think got along really, got to have many conversations with Betsy Cruz Craig, who was the previous artistic director before me, and obviously Diane Tasca until very recently was our board president, and she was the founder. And so have gotten to learn a lot about the incredibly magical history of the pair and all of that good stuff.
Yeah. That's cool. So, what do you think? What do you feel like you uniquely bring to the Pear Theater that maybe that stood out for them? Maybe they've even said that, or something that you just kind of feel internally for yourself for that position.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I and yeah, this is probably the hardest question, because I don't really like talking about
Yeah,
things
it's
that
not
I
going to
feel
be
like I'm
not.
good at, but I do
You're not
think
going to be. It's not braggadocious. It's just
yeah.
uniqueness. Your value.
Yeah, I think well, one, I think I represent a background that is not super well presented represented in the Bay Area in general, in terms of artistic directors being a queer man of color. And I live that and the goals of that as a
Mm-hmm.
leader very proudly. Like, I do see it as imperative to my work as an artist that
Mm-hmm.
I work really hard toward increasing diversity, that we produce plays that are from diverse perspectives and backgrounds about topics that are diverse.
Yeah.
um, I think that I think that, I mean, I have a background in a large number of things, and there's an organization that's at the point where the pair is right now. You kind of, I think, need someone who can be in all of the above, sort of. Like, if something falls between the cracks,
Yeah.
the finances are at a place where, like, I can do some graphic design for the pair every once in a while. I can
Yeah.
write some weekly emails and do some marketing work because I've
Yeah.
done some of that. I can do the filming if that comes up, or
Sure. Yeah.
and talk, intelligently about that. And I think that certainly was something that I think and hope that was a consideration.
Yeah.
um, and then I hope that this came across but I feel very passionately about growing the pair, and about what the pair can look like in 10 years, and
Yeah.
what I think the role of the pair can be in the South Bay.
Yeah.
um, and I try to be really thoughtful about acknowledging where the pair is, and understanding and respecting the history, and also thinking about the areas and places where the pair might be able to grow and improve. And I think that balance was really important to the board, especially in terms of not wanting to hire someone who's just going to come in and say, this is how we do it now.
Sure.
Because the pair is a really tight knit group of subscribers, and incredible supporters who've been around the pair for 20 years.
Yeah.
And we don't want to just go and say, well, that's over now. Here's a new thing. Um,
Right.
and
Yeah, that's a difficult thing, right? To kind of come in with kind of a new direction, if you will, or new vision, or and then yet still honoring the past. I mean, there's usually some transitional difficulty for community. I guess you kind of got lucky in a way because with the pandemic, everything's thrown out.
Transitions, here we come, right?
Yeah, right. It's like pivot is like the word. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Are
I mean, very, very lucky. I think it is the sort of, it's slow, and I think it's important to me to engage as many stakeholders as possible. Like,
yeah,
this fall, I've hand delivered T-shirts to people's front doors, our
yeah,
subscribers, just to make sure they know that we're thinking about them. And
yeah,
we've written, myself and the staff, we've handwritten notes to subscribers and to
yeah,
patrons, and those sorts of things are important. I think, especially because not only am I new to the pair, but, like, no one knows who I am. Like,
yeah.
I
To the
am very
community.
new to the Bay Area, and, like, um, would not have seen me in other plays, or have seen my
Right.
directing in other places. And so that consistent communication, which I think the pandemic facilitated, like, it means that I have more time in front of my computer, certainly, um, has been, I think, at least marginally helpful in making sure that the pair audience can learn who I am, and how I feel. And we're pushing that even harder this year, because I do think that remains to be really important, or
Yeah,
continues
yeah,
to be important.
yeah. So with that, I mean, with the new position, and also because of the time that we're in, what do you think you've kind of like learned about yourself during this whole last year?
Yeah, yeah, that's also an incredible question. You know, this year has not been an easy year for me, either professionally or personally. Had some
Mm,
health issues in my family, and all of those things. And I think the 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 pandemic has really put into perspective, and this is not like a groundbreaking answer to this question, but how pivotal and important human connection is
yeah,
to me. And I
yeah.
am not. I think I always say to people, I'm a people person by trade, and not by not by desire. Like, when I
Really?
am not working, I am a very big homebody. Like, I have a very tight knit group of friends. Like, I don't
Yeah,
really go out or hang out, or, like, I'm a very much the kind of person who keeps to myself. I really appreciate quiet time,
Huh.
Uh,
Yeah.
any of my friends would very clearly be like, "Oh, if Sinjin's coming out, it's a big deal." Like that's the sort of person I am. Um, but those, I feel like I have been really lucky during this pandemic that I currently do not live alone.
Yeah.
Sometimes that feels horrible because I'm stuck in a place with many people, but they also have an art form that allows me and a job that allows me to connect with people on a regular basis via
Yeah.
Zoom or otherwise.
Right.
Um, and I think I learned how important that is to me in a way that I hadn't considered before,
Hmm.
because I'm also kind of a workaholic.
Yeah.
I love the work that I do in every art form, and I don't like being bored. And
Yeah.
so this has given me the opportunity to really like breathe in the meetings and recognize how nice it is on those rare occasions where I can do a social distance walk with someone, or I
Yeah.
can do a Zoom call with someone that isn't work related, or we can
Yeah.
just, have a conversation and enjoy each other's company.
Yeah.
Um, because I think I took those things for granted really quite a lot more than I anticipated I would have. That
Yeah.
sentence construction didn't make any sense, but that's okay.
We
Um,
get the message. Yeah. Yeah. That's
um,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm sorry. So you had some family health issues. What do you want to? Is everything
Yeah,
all
sure.
right? Or
My mom had some non-COVID related serious health issues that has resulted in a diagnosis of a preliminary diagnosis of dementia, of early onset
oh,
dementia for her,
okay.
and so I actually moved her out here to California with me, and so she's living with me right
Oh,
now.
okay. Well,
But
that's yeah, that's great.
yeah, probably for
Love
the
to do that.
foreseeable future, but
Yeah.
it might be better because whereas people couldn't hang out with their family during Christmas, my mom is here.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit more connection than I think a lot of people got. And so there's
Yeah.
meaning. I mean, it's hard, but there's also meaning. There's meaning to a lot of that.
Yeah. That is the craziest paradox, right, of life is that sometimes the most difficult times there's the hardest concrete, there is that little beautiful growth that comes out.
I
It's crazy.
fundamentally, I mean, it's crazy because this is not 2020 was not the year that I had anticipated it being.
Yeah.
Um, and there are glimmers of light, things that we got to do with productions, um, ways in which we got to set ourselves up as the pair that maybe would not have happened
Yeah.
if the pandemic didn't happen. And those like glimmers of positivity are really pivotal to keeping me moving. Certainly, of like it's been a real rough year, and I
Yeah.
certainly want to recognize that like I have not had the most rough year of everyone in the world.
Right.
Like I am nowhere near like the levels in which people have experienced this year,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and there's a little bit of light there, and um, I am glad that I have been able to find that over the last year for myself, certainly.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So let's get back to just a little bit of, I really like what you were talking about, how the the art form or the medium is really dictated or should be, kind of picked by the message that you're trying to communicate, right? I mean, even as so a painter, even right? I mean,
Mhm.
they're telling a story, right? A painting is telling a story, whatever is a play is telling a story. Um, what do you think? What is the what is the power of story? Why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for like literally days about this,
you,
but
you
I'll
got
try
30
to.
seconds. No.
uh,
Tell me a story. Yeah.
yeah, I think to me, the first thing that humans found other after they learned how to survive was story. It's the first thing that we learned in
Yeah,
terms
they
of
probably were
communication.
telling the story of how they just survived.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like, there was like acting out this idea of like there was a giant horrible creature over there and I ran from it and I got away, or it
Yeah.
tripped on a bush or something.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and consistently, even through religion and oral storytelling traditions, and through as we get into quote unquote more formalized civilization and folks settle down and all of those things,
Yeah.
storytelling has has always been a way in which we communicate, to me, a way in which we communicate most effectively.
Hmm.
And we, I think, there are many ways in which stories present themselves, right? In major religious teachings, it's often parables and stories that really
Yeah.
get messages across.
Yeah.
In fact, in science, those sorts of stories, those ideas, are how you explain complex ideas to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
You tell it to them through this situation, this scenario, through telling them a story.
Mm.
And I think that art, religion, and science, this is a major, like, I'll do a PhD one day, and this will be my topic.
I
This
like it.
idea, those three strands are
Yeah.
things to me that are all headed toward the same thing, which is like we want to feel connected to something larger than ourselves. And I
Yeah.
think people get that through a variety of means. You can get that through religion, you can get that through science, you can get that through love with everyday people, you can get that through art. And for me, as I said earlier, I've always found that connection to something larger than myself, that awe,
Hmm.
through art. I haven't found it in any other way, really. And
Yeah.
so to me, there's so much value in learning that. Not to mention the empathy you gain about
Right.
other people and other experiences by learning about either their story or a fictionalized account of someone's story,
Yeah.
and the ways in which the world can open up to you when you see a story that is that just changes your schema and
Yeah.
makes you have to readjust the way in which you perceive the world. That
Yeah.
to me is such a magical moment. And
Yeah.
I think in the age of technology, and as humans grow, get more and more comfortable in whatever existence we have, I think it's maybe a little, we push those moments of awe away for the sake of comfortability, because I do think it requires
Yeah.
you to be out of your comfort zone. And so to me, like, not not to say it in too uh imperative words, but I do think it's like a core fundamental aspect of our humanity, and something that we're at risk of losing if we don't sort
Yeah.
of lean into that thing that helps connect us.
Yeah.
um
So for you, was there a story that you read, you came across, growing up or even recently, that really kind of like helped you, kind of, inspired you, let's say, that, or shaped you?
yeah. I mean, there are a lot. I think for
Sure.
many people in my generation, Harry Potter would be certainly one of those stories.
Hmm.
Like one of the first times where like Harry Potter was coming out and I was the age of Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And so it's those sorts of things that really connect you to a character. And
Yeah.
of course, well, but I mean, I think there is, so I could I wasn't certain about what my major was going to be for my undergraduate degree. When I went, like, it's not like it was a foregone conclusion. I was interested in archaeology and still am
Oh.
very interested in archaeology, to be
Oh,
fair.
okay.
And I was basically like a toss up. But then I watched the movie The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the 2005 version, I think, is when that version came out. And more than that, after that, I listened to the soundtrack of that movie,
Oh. Hmm.
and it is something that I'd really never done that
Hmm.
much before.
Yeah.
Um, and I was like totally dumbfounded
Hmm.
by the way in which I could listen to the music and have a story being told to me through that music,
Yeah.
and have it be both separate and additive to the film. So it stood on its own and it added to the experience of watching the film.
Yeah.
And for my little 15-year-old brain, it like really changed the way I looked at story. And I
Hmm.
understood for the first time that I was like, oh, like, you can create, like, stories exist everywhere and everything is story. How
Yeah.
had I not understood this before? And then I started like connecting dots, because like I really loved history classes. I was like, oh, it's because this is just, but
Yeah.
my textbook just has different stories of different people in here.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't even read the textbook. I just read these little square bubbles of stories in this
Right.
textbook.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's that sort of thing. I mean, there are lots of other films, particular throughout film school. Like there's this French movie called Cachet, which
Hmm.
is a incredible, incredible film, where I remember it's the most surprised I have ever been in any movie
Huh. I'll
ever.
have to check it
And
out.
I won't say, yeah, I won't say too much about it, but there is a moment in that film where I was watching and something happened and I was not ready for it to happen. And then I picked up, like my consciousness returned to me like 7 minutes later. And I was like, that could not have happened.
Huh.
Let me rewind and watch that whole thing again. And that was the first time something like that had happened to me.
Yeah.
Um, recently, that's a great question. I mean, I've ingested a lot of media
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
in the last 8 months. Um, I think uh, I'm co-directing this piece called Fairfield right now for the
Yeah.
Pear.
Hmm.
We're actually like about to start shooting this without gathering, so that'll be a real exciting adventure for us all. That like new experimentation of doing something like we've never done it before.
Yeah. Awesome.
And this play it's a play that I performed in Denver, but it's a different experience directing it because it's a play it's a farce. I don't and it's about race, about this elementary school teacher who decides to celebrate Black History Month in a very unique fashion,
Hmm.
by doing a role playing exercise that goes very poorly.
Oh.
And then things really just spiral from there. And I'm listening to these runs a lot. And there's something about this play where I feel like uh, the characters do so many things wrong. And yet, a large majority of the audience who watches this play will only be able to catch like
Sure.
10% of it. And
Right.
because there are ways in which these characters are racist, and all of the characters are in some way racist, the black
Sure.
characters and the white characters.
Yeah.
They're so connected to the ways in which we just live our lives. And so it's this really beautiful connection where this comedy is so ridiculous, but it's also so close to reality that some people won't
Make
laugh
you
at jokes, and then
uncomfortable. Yeah.
they'll have to come into stark like realization about why they didn't laugh,
Ah.
and
Yeah.
because and have to deal with the reality of the world in that way, which I think is so brilliant. It's a play by Eric Coble, and it's like very rare that you get a piece like this where you laugh throughout and you also are really uncomfortable throughout, and it's
Yeah.
the uncomfortability along with the laughing that forces you to really think about stuff. And
Yeah.
those are the plays for me that are the sweet spot where you're having a great time, and but you're like kind of being indicted also, and
Yeah.
you don't realize you're being indicted until it's too late,
That's
and then
awesome.
you have to deal with whatever happened in your brain, and you just have to reckon with that. And
Yeah.
that's
That's
such a
awesome.
magical moment to experience in myself, even still after having spent a long time with this play in both productions, but also seeing actors have discoveries, and seeing my co-director Aldo Billingsley having discoveries as well, but also like having people read the piece to come up with a study guide for students who are like discovering these things as well, and
That's
those sorts
cool.
of things are really fun.
Now, how are you presenting this? Like, let's talk about the technical production of it. Is it just going to be Zoom screens, or are you guys actually filming? How's that all coming together? Because I know you guys are
Yeah,
doing
so
some
we've
different.
done a variety of things for a variety of shows this season, and to me it's really important to try to do something different every time,
Okay.
so that so it doesn't become stagnant. And we didn't want this to be a Zoom play.
Yeah.
We have sets built at the Pair, but we don't want to gather.
Hmm.
And so our goal is to, and it's going to be really challenging, will be to one person at a time. And so the benefit of
Okay.
this play in this time is that we could set Fairfield takes place at elementary school, so we can set it during COVID times relatively easily for most of the scenes. And so, whereas these meetings might have occurred in person before, we can set them on a Zoom call,
Yeah.
and that will be fine, and create office areas either in folks' homes or somewhere else so that they don't have
Yeah.
to gather, they don't have to connect with other people,
Yeah.
and set up a camera. And so we're hopefully doing this really interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting, obviously, because Aldo and I came up with it, so I think it's great. But I mean, I think we're feeling really confident about. 99% of the piece. I think the end scene is something that we're just going to have to settle on because, at some point you just have to make a judgment call. And that scene is a scene that's designed to be in person. It's this
Oh,
celebrethnic potluck where most of the characters are on stage. And, we're just going to have to figure out what the best way to present that is from people
yeah,
filming
yeah,
from their homes. But for most of these things, we're doing this really unique thing where the Fairfield Elementary School has their own proprietary software. We'll have folks film natively on their computers while they are in a Zoom call so that they can hear each other and potentially see each other, but they will be
mhm,
filming natively on their computers so that the quality of the footage is better.
yeah,
And then they'll upload those things. And then we have other cameras that will be set up for people in a variety of highly sanitized places where
yeah.
they can come in, film a part of a scene against a backdrop, against a set, and then leave that scene while only having to touch a camera and there's no one else in the room with them. But they will also
Wow.
be on the Zoom call during that. So it's quite the logistic nightmare.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to provide this really interesting, and we'll be also be matting and compositing people together as
Oh,
well.
okay. Wow.
So that if there are scenes that are taking place in person, so there's some scenes between the families in this play, then we'll be filming them one and then the other, and then compositing those shots together.
Wow.
So it's going to
Yeah.
be not a task to be undertaken lightly, but
Yeah.
what's interesting to me, what's valuable to me at this time is that for our patrons who can't leave their homes for one reason or another, or in terms of sheltering in place, I think my hope is that if they make a choice to support the pair during these times, they can count on every experience being a unique experience,
Yeah.
and that we will always deliver something. We've not canceled any shows. We've had to adjust course a couple of times, but we haven't canceled any of our show slots, and that we are going to continue to have fun with it and not just view it as we wish we could be in the theater. So
Right.
he, because it's never going to be the same. That's the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so instead of trying to make it be the same, let's try to do something new and different
Yeah.
and experiment in that capacity.
That's awesome. And then you don't know what you're going to stumble upon, right? What you're going to learn. I remember even thinking,
Yeah.
like, soon as the pandemic started happening, I was talking to my wife and I was like, what's going to be the new technologies or the new experiences or the new that's coming out of this that nobody
Yes.
thought of until, like, even, and then even immediately for Zoom to be on everybody's lips like right away was
Yeah.
like crazy. Like, that was like, put it in the dictionary right here, and that's like a local company right around here,
Yeah.
and so we knew it, but then all of a sudden to see Jimmy Fallon say Zoom,
Yep.
and it was like, oh, okay, this has gotten big all of a sudden. But
Yeah. I mean, it's to me, it's very cool, right? And it
yeah,
is a byproduct of like, I wish we could connect more
yeah,
in person with our patrons. I definitely do. And
totally,
not all of our patrons are super interested in seeing
right,
shows on their computers or on their televisions at all. And that's okay too.
yeah,
But while people are watching, we will continue to do it because it's new, and it will just, like, even with Fairfield, we're doing some really cool things. And with our next production, which I am directing solo, which was planned before the pandemic, we are also going to be doing a sort of, you're getting the scoop on this.
okay,
Um,
awesome,
we're also going to be we're doing a companion production in Dragon Theater, which is a theater based
oh
in Redwood City.
yeah,
We're working together to do a companion production so that we'll present Under Milkwood in a very interesting way. Um,
hmm.
and the way that we're setting Under Milkwood is sort of post-apocalyptic, reflecting on the things that give you hope, and then creating the world of Under Milkwood in this attempt to see hope. And they're going to take that world and they're going to create an immersive production on Gather,
Oh
which is
yeah,
another one of those platforms that,
yeah,
who would have thunk that
yeah,
was. But I do think, and they've done other productions on Gather as well. This will
oh cool,
be their third. They did, and so we've been talking about how to connect those pieces in a really interesting and meaningful way for people who are interested in digging deeper into this mythology that we can only see so much of in the context of this
yeah,
slightly more traditional production, and then they can explore to their heart's content in this immersive gather production.
Yeah, that's fun. That's cool.
So it's just like, and this would have never happened. I mean, I'm great friends with Max and Alika over at the Dragon. They are some of the people who I've connected with most deeply since I've gotten to the Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
And like, would this have been a thing that we thought of doing
Right.
before the pandemic? Certainly not.
Yeah, yeah, that's cool. Well, awesome, man. Like I said, I think it's amazing that you came with this skill set. Like right at the beginning of this. That's kind of fortuitous for the pair and for our community. And I like just your perspective of like let's not just try to do things wishing we're in the theater, but to explore them. So, thank you for bringing that to the pair and to our community.
I know. I mean, I feel lucky to be here, and
Yeah.
I get to do the things that I love for a living.
Yeah,
That's
that's
like
awesome.
great bonus for me.
Yeah, nice work if you can get it. If you can get it, tell me how.
Exactly.
Cool. All right, man. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And so Fairfield is going to starts on the 22nd and goes till February 21st, right? So people can go to the website and sign up and get all the details for that, right?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. And then you're going to be doing a seminar for SV Creates coming up January 20. Oh, is it on the 26th?
26th. Yeah.
26th. Yeah. Yeah. So awesome. So people can catch you on that too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I want to say thank you so much for having me on. This has been a really lovely time.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can meet in person soon. I'm kind of like you when you were talking about it. It's like I love connecting with people, but at the same time, I do totally just disengage and can stay home forever. But
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's like when I talk to someone, especially like, I mean, I was fascinated to start to kind of research you and to see all the different mediums that you're working in and the stories that you're telling that are so like earthy and raw and with this traumatic. It was like, wow, okay, Sinjin's an interesting cat. I got to figure out how to hang out sometime. So once the pandemic's done, we can go get a cocktail, beer, tea, whatever.
Yeah, I happily will commit to that because you also seem like a really cool guy to get to know.
It's all smoke and mirrors. Yeah. Cool. Well, awesome, man. I appreciate it. And we'll see you in the real world or the virtual world soon. Thank you.
Thank you. You as well.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
To find out more about Sinjin and his work, you can go to his website, sinjinjones.com, and also check out the Pear Theatre and their productions at thepear.org. Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Visit our website to become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the local creatives. This episode's music is Time Alone by Mild Monk. Follow him on Spotify and also on his Instagram at Mild Monk Music.